Hello everyone. Today I'll be showcasing our flagship NiFi operations product. We call it DFM or Data Flow Manager. So first, what is the core problem that based on which why DFM was created, right? So we have been working with NiFi Ops for long, okay, um, and many of our customers also have been using NiFi Ops. The biggest challenge that has been there, it is not about, let's say, just installing and deploying your NiFi flows, right? It is the overall management of your NiFi operations. So you will be doing, let's say, cluster upgrades, patching your manual flow deployments. Then, in case maybe something goes wrong, you have to do a rollback also, right? So all these tasks are very time consuming for an NiFi operation person. And in case if something goes wrong, you don't know who did at what time, and for that mistake, it can lead to a significant downtime, which can hurt the business. So these were the core challenges which NiFi Ops teams always faces. DFM was built to solve all of these challenges and brings in much more capabilities. Right. So I'll start with, there are many capabilities in DFM, but what I'll start with is I'll start with some of the most used and most prominent features of DFM, which we feel will be very useful for you and which are actually being used by most of our clients. Then I'll also cover the remaining features of DFM. They are also useful, and you can see during the demo how they bring in that benefit. All right, so I hope my screen is visible to everyone. I'll start with the first. The very first operation that any NiFi operation team will have to do is setting up of a DFM of a NiFi cluster. Now, what happens is, to set up a cluster, you need to do certain prerequisites. Then you need to have your NiFi options team execute maybe some scripts, and then they have to ensure also that that cluster is secure. It is TLS enabled, all of that, right? After that, you may also need to integrate it with different, let's say, systems, for example, SSO, LDAP, right? So doing all of this manually is a very time-consuming effort for any NiFi ops, and it's not easy. Usually, it will take them, if not, maybe a day, but at least good amount of, maybe hours to do that. With DFM, you can do that completely within a few minutes. So let's see. I'll just quickly show you I'll not go through the detail, but I'll show. So DFM has an option of creating a new cluster. Now you can create this cluster on on premises also, and you can also launch it into containers. So on your Kubernetes environment or maybe on cloud. Okay. What DFM will do is you need to provide it certain information. For example, if I'm launching a DFM cluster on host on on premise, right? I need to provide it my host details. I can add, these are like my VMs, which I can add over here, and I have to provide the basic details of those VMs, the IP, the port, all right. And once I have added my hosts, I can decide how many hosts I want to use to create my cluster. So let's say I've added 2 or 3 hosts. Okay. Using those hosts and DFM, my whole cluster will be launched in approximately 5 to 6 minutes. Okay. I already have my clusters ready-made, so I'll just, I'm not going to do that whole process right now. The same you can do if you are trying to launch a cluster in Kubernetes. Instead of running it on VMs, you provided details of your Kubernetes environment, your control plane usernames and password for the Kubernetes, and DFM will launch a NiFi cluster completely secure on your Kubernetes environment. All right. Second most used feature, most prominent feature that we say of DFM is about flow deployments. So now your clusters are created. You want to use those clusters to run your NiFi flows. So obviously you need to deploy NiFi flows onto those clusters. We call that as flow deployment. So once your cluster is created, you can log into the cluster via DFM, and then we can deploy our data flows using those clusters. So how do we do that? We go to deploy, we select any bucket, we select the data the data flow that we want to deploy. Now this data flow is assumed to be sort of developed by my developer, and I am now trying to deploy it into my let's say UAT cluster. Okay, so let's say I select okay, this one. Okay, so I select my data flow. I select the version of data flow. I click on continue. Over here, you can see, I can see a mini map of my NiFi UI, right? And I can drag and drop wherever I want my process to be deployed on that UI. I click on continue. With DFM, I also have the option of setting up my configuration of that data flow. I don't need to go to NiFi UI again, right? All parameter context variables that I need to set, I can set them all from within DFM. All right, then once that is done, DFM has another feature, what we call as flow validation. So these are like rules using which you can ensure that the flows which are being deployed in your environment pass certain criteria. These can be your best practices criteria. These can be sort of your configuration, your configurations which you need across all the data flows. So these rules I have got certain predefined rules. You can also, DFM also has capability to allow you to add your own rules. So I can, let's say, just maybe I can select a couple of these and I do a validation, quick validation. All of my rules pass. It also, in case if some rule has failed, so DFM will give you a recommendation. In this case, it is actually not a failure, but it has suggested that you have just one concurrent task. Usually you might want to run multiple concurrent tasks. So this is up to me. Let's say I'm okay with one. I click on to continue, right? And then I click on to deploy. Within few seconds, DFM will deploy this process into my cluster. This whole process would usually take, without DFM, would usually take at least 3 to 4 hours for a NiFi ops person to execute. You have to ensure that you have access to the cluster. You have to ensure that you have the right process group that you want to deploy. You have to set up all the configuration, right? With DFM, we saw that this could be done within, I would say, almost 30 seconds. Almost 30 seconds. Give and take, maybe you might need to do certain more configuration. So you can say, let's say it takes around 30 minutes. But still, our calculations show that using DFM for your flow deployments can lead to savings of almost 80% of your NiFi ops time. Convert that to the cost, and you will be saving good number of thousands of dollars every deployment. All right. So this was what we call as instant deployment. You needed an admin to be available to execute this process and to do this deployment. Okay. Many times it also happens that we want to do a data flow deployment or a release during off business hours when my system is not being used, or maybe on weekends, maybe it is on a holiday, right? Maybe during late night. So to do that, there is no easy option available outside of DFM. You will be doing maybe some custom script or something, but you still need the person to be available on desk to execute that. With DFM, we have a concept called scheduled deployments. What it will do is, you will follow the same steps what I did for instant deployment, but over here, DFM will allow you to select a time and a date for that deployment. I may not be doing completely, but I'll just show quickly. All right, so over here, you can select that date and time. When do you want to do that deployment? Okay. And based on this, DFM will execute the deployment at that time. You don't need a person to be available to execute the deployment. This again allows, this actually basically helps your NiFi Ops team to be more, you don't need them to be available on off business hours. All right. So next I'll talk about. So what we saw right now was instant deployments as well as scheduled deployments. Okay. Another very important feature of DFM is about audit logs. So when you are doing a data flow deployment, you need to know who has done it at what time in your cluster, whether it was success, whether it was failure. And usually you need to look across different systems to build that sort of a report, what we call it, or maybe your audit reports. You will be going into one system to check who was logged in. You will maybe going to other system to see who did that deployment. And then maybe you will need some other system to tell you whether the deployment was successful or it was a failure. So you have to go through multiple systems and then combine all the data to build an audit report. With DFM, you will get that instantly in a single window. We call that activity history. Over here, you can see who all has been doing what across all of your NiFi environments. Okay, so very quickly, I just did a deployment, right? It was for this process, this data flow. It was done in this cluster, and it was successful. And what was the time of the deployment? Okay, and obviously who did that deployment? Okay, so you see everything in one single window. You don't need to go to any other system. Why this helps? This is very useful from the perspective of compliance. You can download these reports and you can keep a tag across, how your clusters are being used. Okay. Okay. Next, we talk about, security in DFM. So we have clusters which were set up. We talked about flow deployments. We saw audit logs also, right? Now, the users who are actually using this DFM, how is their access controlled? Now, imagine if you do not have DFM and you have got let's say you have got 5 NiFi environments across different, 5 NiFi environments. So maybe you have dev, UAT, staging, prod, right? And for each environment, you will have NiFi users also. You will have to go and configure each of those users' access on all the NiFi clusters individually. Now imagine if you have got 10, 15, 20 developers. Doing that for each developer on each cluster. And it is not easy in doing it by NiFi UI. You have to select individually for each, right? Then imagine if any of those permissions goes wrong. You again have a security, you can have a security risk. More than that, you may want, let's say, certain level of access on development environment, but you will have a restricted access on maybe your UAT and even more on your production environment. So you have to ensure that all these permissions are being set correctly across each environment. What we have seen, usually this drifts. So NiFi Ops may have given a permission to one developer, and maybe he had to give us the higher level of access on UAT also. Maybe the developer needed certain debugging, there was some issue, so he had to increase the developer's access on UAT or maybe even prod due to debugging of that issue. But that issue, once it gets resolved, he may forget to remove that access. So your permissions slowly start drifting. The developer start getting different access. Okay. With DFM, you can save all of this. We have a concept of roles and permissions in DFM. DFM gives a fine-grained access, what we call as, so these are like permissions that allow what you can do, what you cannot do on your NiFi clusters. You can select these permissions, you can group these permissions together, and you create a role. Then you can assign that role to your DFM user. Now that DFM user may be, let's say, a developer. You can create a developer role, assign that role to all your developers. Then you can create, let's say you have a UAT cluster, you have a production cluster, you can create separate roles for those clusters, and you can assign those roles also to those to the selected group of people. And one person can have different roles. Okay. Now with this, you know exactly who has got what access, and DFM can propagate that access to all the NiFi clusters. So you don't need to go to any of NiFi clusters. You again manage all of that from within DFM. All right. Then we talked about security in DFM. I will now go to another feature of DFM, which we call as flow sanity. This instance does not have flow sanity configured, but let me explain what happens is, one of the very common issues that a NiFi ops faces during flow deployment is, he may have configured something incorrect. Maybe a username password was configured incorrectly. Maybe some processor was configured incorrectly. Okay, so there is some error. What happens is, usually when you do the deployment of that flow in the cluster, and when you start that data flow, then you see, okay, this is the error, and that flow does not start. So you have to go back, identify that error, then fix that error, and then redeploy that flow. Now imagine if that you had taken a specific amount of downtime to do the deployment. So now unnecessary, your time is getting utilized. Okay, or actually it's getting wasted. You may have to, let's say you misconfigured a port number. So now you need to go and identify what is the right port. You may have to go and ask to some other team. You may need to involve your, let's say maybe some other team to enable that port for your cluster. You may need to go to your database team to get the right URL, right username, right access credentials for that database, right? But if this is happening at an off business hours, you have no one to go to. All right. So what do you do then? You only have to do a rollback. Then you have to again take a planned downtime, and then you have to do this, right? So a lot of effort goes waste. Convert that to your time, convert that to your money, convert that to the frustration that the ops team will have, right? With DFM, we have a feature which will do this test for you before that deployment actually happens. So let's say I want to do a deployment during my off business hour, let's say tonight. With DFM, I'll schedule that deployment. I have already shown, right? How do I do that scheduling, right? I can schedule my deployment. And during the scheduling of deployment, I'll request DFM to do a flow sanity. DFM internally will do a temporary deployment of that flow into the cluster. It will not start the flow. Obviously, we cannot do that, but it will do checks on that flow. These are like intelligent checks. So it will tell you, these are the things which are missing. So maybe if you have a incorrect database access, it will prompt you that you have these issues. If you have incorrect port, it will capture that. And it will give you a list of all such issues. So I have, let's say, whole of day today, till my day, let's say my deployment is happening in midnight. So I have whole of day today to go and fix those issues. So I have ample time. I have people who are around. I can go and fix those issues. And once this is all done, at midnight, when DFM will trigger that flow, I will not be seeing any issues. My flow deployment will go smooth. Okay. Imagine, like I said, right, the time and the frustration it saves. All right. So these are, I talked about the most used, the most prominent features of DFM. Cluster setup, launching clusters on premises, on Kubernetes, on containers, your flow deployments, instant as well as scheduled, right? Then doing audits on those flows. You don't need to go to any other system, right? Security of your entire NiFi environment using roles and fine-grained permissions using DFM. Then also talked about flow sanity and also hinted about flow validation where you had your own rules. Okay. Now let's move to other features of DFM. So we have what we call as LDAP configuration. So this is again very useful when you have a common authentication authorization system for your other environments. You would definitely like to use that also for DFM. Most of the time it is Active Directory or LDAP. So DFM has an out-of-the-box support for LDAP. Similarly, if you are using SSO, DFM can be integrated with your SSO ecosystem also. Okay. Then we have what we call as controller services. Now, almost all of your NiFi data flows will be using controller services in one way or the other. I mean, your NiFi developers will be creating this. Your NiFi ops team will be managing these control services. Usually you would be doing this by logging into your NiFi UI, adding your regular, that control service over there, enabling it, and then making it accessible across, across the cluster. You can do the same thing from within DFM. Now the question may be, right, why DFM, for this, what is special, right? So the idea over here is that we want all the actions that you are doing within NiFi UI to be performed within DFM. You don't need to go out of DFM to any other place, to any other application. All of your NiFi ops work should be done from within DFM. So the person who is using DFM, he becomes used to it. He doesn't need to go to NiFi UI and do other, any other thing. And especially this would also be helpful if you have, like I said, right, multiple NiFi clusters, multiple NiFi environments. You have to identify which environment, then you go to log into that NiFi UI and then do those things, right? With DFM, you simply select that environment, that cluster over here, and then you can, do all that what you were doing in NiFi UI within DFM. So it is from the perspective of ease, or you can say convenience. All right. Okay. Next, I'll go to. So this is again more. This is very specific to your monitoring. All organizations will be having one or the other system for alerting and monitoring. So maybe you're using Prometheus, you're using Grafana, right? Usually you'll be monitoring your NiFi clusters also through that. But what happens is the metrics that you're collecting, they are only related to your cluster health. They will tell you, the CPU usage, they will tell you the RAM, they will tell you, the cluster health metrics only. But they will not be telling you NiFi metrics. This is where DFM comes useful. It becomes useful. DFM has specific metrics which are related only to your NiFi. For example, what are the total number of processors running in my cluster? Right. What are the number of active threads which are concurrently running? Right. What is my queue length? Now, these are very NiFi specific metrics. And let's say if your node is misbehaving, or maybe you have a process which is very critical and it starts slowing down for any reason, your existing health system or your existing monitoring system will not catch that. If a NiFi processor is misbehaving or it is getting late, it's starting to show latency, your existing monitoring systems will not be able to catch that. Ultimately, what happens is that process will ultimately break. There will be certain delay in the processing of in that process, and then maybe after a long time, some alert will be raised, and then DevOps team will get organized, and then they will start fixing that issue. But that time, a significant amount of time has already lapsed. With DFM and with these metrics, you will have that alert the moment it starts happening. You don't. So the moment any of these, let's say, triggers get hit, you will receive an alert. Your ops team will receive an alert. Okay, this processor has probably started showing some issue. Okay, or maybe this node is starting to give an issue. So your ops team can engage immediately before that issue actually becomes critical. Okay. And like I said, these are NiFi specific metrics, so you will not be able to capture these outside of, without DFM. Or you will have to do, you will have to write your own custom logic to capture these scripts. Okay. Even then, so this is like you are capturing all the metrics at cluster level, but maybe you also have certain critical processes which you want to monitor separately. Now, there is no way of doing that using your traditional monitoring systems. With DFM, we have what we call as monitoring specific processors also. So let's say I can select any of these process groups which are deployed in my cluster, and then these metrics start populating based on that process group only. So now I'm not looking at, though I'm logged into my cluster, but within that cluster also I'm capturing metrics only for that specific process group. So let's say I'm a bank and this process group is for sending my transactions data to my federal bank, or this is something which is very critical for me. I want to have my eyes continuously onto this. Okay. With DFM, it becomes very easy. I can monitor specific NiFi metrics only for this process group, and I can set alerts specific to this process group only. So monitoring becomes very intelligent. All right. Okay. Next, let's move to. So till now we have been talking mostly about the NiFi operations part. Okay. But let's say because you will be having NiFi developers also, right? So how can NiFi developers utilize DFM? So we have what we call as a data flow inventory. Essentially, what this is a catalog of almost 400, 500 different ready-made data flows. So if you have to build a new NiFi data flow, instead of starting from scratch, maybe you can look into this inventory and see if a similar matching data flow exists. If so, you can use that and save your development efforts. These flows are battle tested by us. They are validated, they are verified, and they run, flawlessly. Another way you can do this is you also can upload your own templates into this. For example, if you have a certain, you can say a reusable data flow. So you can create that reusable data flow as a template and upload that template into this data flow inventory. So anytime when you need to start your development, you can take the template and then do the development. So it could be, let's say, like we call in terms of reusable components, right? So think of this like a reusable data flow. You can create your data flows, you can create them as templates and save them or upload them into your inventory, and your development teams can start utilizing that whenever they need to do any new data flow development. All right. I think that is all from my side. I'll take a pause now.